We are joined on A News Now by Paula Francis, a longtime anchor here, and a KLAS Hall of Famer, and a dear friend to all of us. And Paula, as you and I are just talking off air, I want to extend my condolences to you in the loss of Gary. He was such a great friend to you, as well as a colleague for, we're talking 3 decades. And
Yes.
The news so shocking to everyone. I'm wondering, not just the news anchor Gary, but some of the personal recollections you have when you think about the wonderful man he was. What did you think about today as you reflected on Gary?
Oh, Brian, I actually think about Gary every day. We were in touch quite a lot. We shared a very similar sense of humor. People always realized Gary was just the newsman. That was his reputation, and he owned it, and he really cared. He had the greatest BS detector of any news person I've ever met. But if you knew him in person, he was the greatest, kindest friend anyone could have. And he would do anything for a friend. He was just very, he was never stuck up or taken by his fame. And he was really famous. You walk through a casino before a live shot or down the strip or anywhere in town, and people would just stare at Gary. He was famous, but I was so lucky to have him as a friend. I was so lucky to have him as a colleague. The years that I sat on the desk with Gary were the best years of my career.
I remember a couple lunches with him. I was thinking it was like Santa Claus to the North Pole. I didn't know if we were going to be able to get to order. Everybody knew Gary.
Yeah.
One thing, Paula, as you well know, he was so present in the newsroom with everyone, stopping at people's desks and really lending time and getting to know everyone. The interpersonal nature of him is such a fond memory. Talk about that style he had, where he was leading up the news team and these newscasts, but he just had time for everyone seemingly all the time.
He did. He worked very hard because, he wrote all his scripts, or at least rewrote them in his style, which gave him that great everyman kind of delivery. But in the newsroom, he was a great mentor, and he would help out anybody, whether they asked for it or whether they needed it and didn't know it. And he had such great advice. I think about his advice every day, sometimes personal advice or things about the world. He was so in tune to current events, to news, to history, and he really wanted to impart that to young people. I don't know if you knew that his mom was a teacher, and so Gary was kind of a teacher that way. I wasn't that much younger than him, but he taught me a lot. Some of the best lessons that I could learn in journalism, and how to relate to the viewer, and how to think about our responsibility as well as staying humble.
Can you share a piece of advice or maybe something, a motto of his that he imparted over the years?
Yes, newsrooms are full of a range of people, and a lot of times the industry gets sort of a reputation for choosing people who are, good looking, or they could have been a model, but they wound up here, whatever that song is. Gary always said, find the smartest people you can and hire them and teach them TV. It was his belief that a smart person could learn the job and would be better at it than someone who just looked the part.
Well put. Commercial breaks during a newscast, often a time of great banter, joking around, sometimes relatively blue humor. Talk about what Gary was like in between the newscast and during the commercial breaks.
We talked from the moment the microphones went off to the moment they came back on. We were so involved as friends, and we were involved in the news and talking about what was going on. But Gary was a great joke teller, and he could really tell jokes well. Fortunately for him, I couldn't remember jokes. So we went through like 20 years sitting together on the set, and he could tell me a joke over and over and over again, and I would still laugh hysterically.
You gotta love it.
He did appreciate that. But one of the things about Gary, sometimes, Brian, I'm sure you've had the occasion when something strikes you funny and it's not appropriate, and all of a sudden you find yourself trying to stifle the laughter.
Yes.
Well, Gary and I had a few moments like that. And I won't tell you what the context was because no one would want to know that. But Gary had this huge grin and these beautiful teeth, and you didn't see him really smile or laugh that much unless he was really, really broken up. And when I saw his teeth and that big smile, and then his eyes would kind of scrunch up, and then I was helpless. I couldn't talk, he couldn't talk, so they just had to go to commercial.
It's contagious. You just lose it. You start biting the inside of your cheeks, anything to try to stop it.
Yep.
You, as a team, Gary and Paula, as a team, covered some of the biggest stories in Las Vegas history. You were there together, navigating everything from PepCon to MGM to some of the biggest in the history of our city. What was it like to anchor and drive a newscast with Gary? You guys were such a tremendous team. What was that like in terms of the news and journalistic portion of it?
Gary knew so much, and he had a mind like a steel trap for details and facts, and he could just pull them out of thin air. So it was really a great blessing to sit next to an anchor like that who could really carry it. And he knew so much about Las Vegas, and it was like he was woven into the fabric of Las Vegas. So he could talk on anything to do with Las Vegas. Breaking news became less and less common. I don't know why that is, but we used to go on at the drop of a hat and go in what we called wall-to-wall news.
Sure.
On 9/11, Gary and I came in, and there was nothing to do on Channel 8 because CBS took over. And so Gary and I went on Las Vegas 1, which was the cable station that we had at that time. And we had no information, but we just kept talking and talking to each other and talking about what it meant. And we had wire services in those days,
Yes.
Remember, before cell phones and all of that good stuff that we rely on now. But Gary could always bring not just background and history, but he brought perspective.
Mhm.
He knew where things fit in the great fabric of mankind. He just had a sense for it.
How about the more unique aspects of Gary? When you think about working in a newsroom with him, I think about the tarantula, Frankie.
Yes.
Maybe the newsroom mascot is what we could call Frankie. Or, I mean, I don't know how many times he told me, you got to go see the bighorn sheep in Boulder City, and talk about some of the unique personality traits that made Gary so lovable.
That's lovable. Yeah, he loved the Nevada desert. He loved his motorcycle. He was always out there with his friends, and he had all the equipment, and he had one of those stereos, and he could talk to the other guys on his bike, and he loved that. But he also had the gentle side where he loved that tarantula, Frankie, and he'd pull Frankie out when we'd have a tour of Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or students had come through the newsroom, and pretty soon they'd all be gathered around his desk, and he'd have the spider out, and people would want to hold it, and it really made it kind of cute.
There were always people that were seemingly drawn to Frankie, and then people that were running the other way.
Yes, that's true. And Gary often encouraged me to hold on to Frankie, put him in my hand, but I couldn't, because I thought, well, if Frankie moves, or starts up my arm, then I'm going to toss him against the wall, and Gary will be really upset. And I couldn't stand that.
I could talk to you all day. New Year's Eve, you guys did so many fantastic shows together. It was a staple of Las Vegas to watch the two of you bring in the new year. That's such a fun night. It's such a party. It's joyful. Yeah. What are some of your memories of anchoring and taking home that New Year's Eve newscast with Gary?
Oh, we loved it. Las Vegas is such a special place, and on New Year's Eve, it just pulls out all the stops. And to be right in the middle of it on the Strip, we just loved it. It did have kind of a scary element because the crowds were very big,
Yes.
but we always had a good time, and we felt so special because every new casino that opened, we knew we would be doing New Year's Eve there, and it was just great. Gary, again, it was just great to be beside him on a news set or out in the world doing whatever. He always knew what he was talking about. He always kept it together. And I would always kind of lose it on New Year's Eve, but he kept me down to earth. So we were a great team, and we had a great time.
You were a great team. I was looking at a picture of you and Gary, Dave, and a couple others from the 65th anniversary celebration a couple years ago. What was that like to reunite with the squad? It must have been special.
It's like that no time passes at all. Every time I saw Gary after he retired in 2012, it was just, there was no in between time. And I saw him at a going away party for one of our Channel 8 colleagues just this spring. And we were all excited because we'd been vaccinated and we felt free. We were at a party for the first time, and he was just in his element. It was so great to see him. He enjoyed life.
He really did. Yes. I'm telling some of our younger colleagues about Gary, and I'm curious, how would you describe Gary in a couple of words, someone that was such a close friend and colleague of yours for so long?
Solid newsman, greatest friend.
Beautifully said. Paula, it's been a joy talking to you. I don't know what's in the water in Wisconsin, but you're ageless and you look fantastic. And we so appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of your memories of a wonderful man.
Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about Gary.
All right. Thanks, Paula. Appreciate it.